and give myself those extra like 30 seconds of grace. But let's go for pediatric feeding framework. Does everyone have a copy of the pediatric feeding framework? Give me a 1 if yes and a 2 if no, because this lets me know, do I need to show you where it is and get it in your hand? Okay, I'm seeing 2s. So I'm going to stop this share real quick. And John is my awesome assistant. He's hanging out in the chat tonight too, but he is going to drop the link and I'm going to screen share the link. But if you go to circle, yeah, I'll type it, circle educationpeds.com, and he's dropping it too. He's beat me to it. Go to that link. I'm going to screen share and walk you through step by step where you go. This is my main, just like all in one place educational platform. You're going to scroll down beyond all this blabber because this is inviting you to join this training where you're already here. You don't need that until you get to the training itself, and then get to the blue button and just click the download the pediatric feeding framework button. Everybody with me? Give me some 1s if you're clicking and downloading the button and you're getting the framework in your hand, so I know that we're safe to keep rolling. Okay, Taylor's got it. Pollyanna's got it. Jaquai's got it. Rachel's got it. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So that is the main tool that we're going to use for this next rest of the training. Let me get my next screen back up. There we go. Racing the clock is fun, fun, fun. There we go. All right. Now that you've got the pediatric feeding framework in your hand, let's break down what do we do with this training and how do you use it. So to introduce it to you, what I'm going to say is we're not going to go over everything that's in this training tonight. But what I am going to do is I'm going to take you straight to the center and teach you how to use the meat of it in line with things that you already know. What I hope to prove to you is that you know a whole lot more about peds feeding than you realize, and that you have more capability within your skill sets to safely and effectively treat the kids that you're already working with, again, than you realize. Okay? We're not going to go over all the outside rings, but I do just want to like give them a wink to like, do sensory needs inform our feeding interventions? Of course. Does the child behavior inform our feeding interventions? Yes, they do. Does the family's culture of how they eat, what they eat, when they eat, where they eat inform our feeding? Yes. Do the postural considerations of, chin tuck, neutral chin, shoulders over hips, feet and neck supported, all that is foundational and totally covered in my course. But for tonight, for these 20 more minutes, we're just going to zoom right into the middle. And if you are a kinesthetic learner or a visual learner, give me a 1 in the chat. Give me a 2 in the chat if you're like an auditory learner or a different learning style. I'm a kinesthetic learner, meaning like you got to give it to me hands-on for it to soak into my brain. I'm also a huge visual learner. And if you do research on OT practitioners, what you will find is most of the therapists in our profession are drawn to this field because that is how we learn, that is how we thrive. So I would also invite you, if you're at home, I just have like a little sticky pad, but sticky pad is more than enough. But I want you to get something in front of you so that you can take notes. So as we break apart the meat of the center of this framework, you're able to really cement it deep down and like utilize your learning style to help you have the best outcome with your time tonight. Okay? Give me a 1 if you've got something in front of you and you're ready for me to roll to the next step. What we're going to focus on within this framework is this gray triangle. So if you zoom into the middle, does everyone notice there's a gray triangle with 3 sections? And within that triangle, we have passive evaluation or passive interventions. We have active evaluation or active interventions. And then we have functional evaluation or functional interventions. So let's dive right in. There is some things that this framework changes about the box that occupational therapy practitioners have been put in for, right? Because again, we might be challenging those assumptions of like, wait a minute, occupational therapy practitioners, you're supposed to be doing sensory. What are you doing with oral motor? Deb just said oral motor is the meat and potatoes of what we're doing tonight. So I am asking you to make some transitions here, just like mentally with how you're thinking about your feeding kids. And I'm going to give you some analogies. So who in the room, if you saw someone using a walker to cross the street or go down the sidewalk, your brain would go to, oh my goodness, that person is reliant. They have a behavior that they're reliant on that walker. And we need to just take the walker away so that they learn to walk on their own. Who would go and do that intervention? Give me a 1 if you think you'd go jerk the walker out. And give me a 2 if instead you would go, there must be a reason that person needs a walker. That person might have a balance impairment. That person might have an endurance impairment. Maybe they look like they're walking strong now, but maybe they fatigue. That person might have a strength disparity in one leg or the other, right? So when we see an obvious physical problem, our brains as therapists immediately go there. We're thinking, well, there's an obvious physical reason for this physical problem. But this crazy things happens with peds feeding because what do our referral sources, our parents, and even the kids themselves seem to say or present as? It seems to be picky eating, right? Give me a 1 in the chat if you have picky eating kids on your caseload or picky eating referrals, or your number one complaint when you do a feeding evaluation or have a feeding client is the parent is like, oh my goodness, they're such a picky eater. I would just be so much happier if they would eat a bigger variety of foods, right? So the thing is, I'm asking you to reframe with thinking about this framework is view the picky eating as the walker. The picky eating is the behavior, just like using a tool to compensate for a physical deficit is a behavior, but there is a valid reason for that behavioral change, okay? So that's how we're gonna think about our kids tonight, is things like picky eating are not just picky eating. Things like sensory sensitive eating are not just sensory sensitive eating. There's a valid, meaningful reason behind that. And all of us working in peds know like the cardinal rule of pediatrics is behavior is communication, right? Give me a 1 if you're familiar with that thought process as a pediatric practitioner. Behavior is communication. So picky eating behavior is a communication that something is wrong about the child's ability to eat. It's a totally different way to do it. And I am by no means saying take sensory needs and throw them in the garbage or take behavioral needs and throw them in the garbage. They're in our scope of practice too, and kids need those support as well. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper past the waves of sensory, past the waves of behavior, and kind of reframe this way of thinking. It is going to challenge a main belief that occupational therapists and occupational therapy assistants focus on the sensory aspects of feeding in isolation. It is so much more than that, right? What we're going to do, I'm going to have John drop the AOTA scope of practice in feeding in the chat. And I'm going to do a quick screen share so that you can also see what is your scope of practice, because let me tell you, it is broader than what you might think. So if you go to that link that John dropped, you could also follow along with the screen share. AOTA in the American Journal of Occupational Therapy wrote this gorgeous document, The Practice of Occupational Therapy in Feeding, Eating, and Swallowing. It has beautiful analogies and explanations and definitions, but we're going to slide right past that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take you to the chart at the end to help you remember that here, during the assessment phase of occupational therapy process, entry-level education, meaning a new grad, right? An OT or OTA, this is what they are prepared to assess within feeding. For assessment or evaluation, you can see that occupational therapists have a lot more check boxes than OTAs. And then the second part of this is intervention. What does entry-level education, the new grad level of education as an OT or OTA prepare you to do in peds feeding? It prepares you to work on the context of feeding. It prepares you to work on the pre-oral phase. It prepares you to work on the oral phase, the pharyngeal phase, the esophageal phase. You can do so many things. We're not going to deep dive in that, but I want you to know that so that when you're thinking about your feeding kids, there's so much more to the picture than just the behavior of how they're eating. The second article that we can use easily to heavily defend our scope of practice in feeding is going to be the OT practice framework. And John will drop that link again. But give me a 1 if you had to nearly memorize the occupational therapy practice framework as an OT student or OTA student. And that was just like, that's your bread and butter, right? It was right there with the occupational profile. So the occupational therapy practice framework has a really cool place in feeding as well, because it has a hidden scope of practice place. Okay, can everyone see my screen? The OT practice framework, demand and process, 4th edition. That's the current edition that we're on now. Give me a 1 if you can see my screen. Taylor and Pollyanna are letting me know they're with me. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to again scroll through this document because you don't need me to read the whole framework to you. I just want to point out where feeding is a huge part of your practice. And you might already know this, or you might have known it, and kind of forgot about it because it's not what you see happening as like main place in the pediatric world. Zoop, 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 zoop. Scrolling. What I'm looking for is the chart of occupations. As occupational therapy practitioners, we know that occupations are who we are, right? This is the article that defines like who are you as a professional and what do you do? So if we look at occupations, there are 8 foundational occupations listed in this chart. They include bathing, showering, toileting, dressing, eating and swallowing, feeding, functional mobility, personal hygiene and grooming, and sexual activity. So 2 out of 8 of our foundational occupations that define our profession include eating and swallowing and feeding. I'm hoping that I just blew your brain, or you already knew that. You've already been utilizing these tools in your practice. Either way is fine, but give me a 1 in the chat if you now know that occupational therapists have a well-defined and well-defended scope of practice in eating, feeding, and swallowing. Give me a 2 in the chat if there's a question in your mind as to should or shouldn't occupational therapy practitioners be working in feeding. And we see that the room is blowing up with ones, okay? Again, the pediatric feeding framework challenges this main belief that OTs focus on sensory. And I am asking you to reframe your way of thinking about occupational therapy and feeding. I am asking you to focus on the oral motor skills and deficits that explain why, just like that person using the walker has a why. The children who are not eating foods have a why hiding behind that behavior that explains why they can't participate in certain feeding tasks. How then do you target it, right? So, okay, we're on the same page. We agree there's a why, and we need to know more about oral motor, but how do we do that? Let's go. The pediatric feeding framework is going to be your answer. Remember, I asked you to have something to write on and, pen and paper. So what I want to ask you to do at this time is to make a triangle on your paper, okay? So your triangle is going to look like, oh no, I've got a blur on. Everybody can see I've got a triangle on this piece of paper there, right? Yeah, I'll put it by my face. That'll be better. No, that's worse. There we go. Does everyone have a triangle? You're going to take your triangle, slice it into 3 slices, and you're going to write under the first one, passive, the tippy little tip of it, passive, okay? When we look at that in the framework itself, it looks like this, passive intervention. So let's talk about what does passive mean? What the heck are we talking about, right? Passive is all the physical things that we do in a hands-on way to our clients or to our patients to assess what their abilities are, to inform us of what our interventions need to be, or as an intervention to promote range of motion, et cetera, et cetera. So you might be thinking, okay, Deb, I don't know anything about passive skills. Wrong. You know so much about passive skills. So let me take you back down memory lane. If you were in OT or OT school, did you ever have to do an activity where you placed your arm maybe on the back of a shoulder and an elbow and did passive range of motion for shoulder flexion? Give me a 1 in the chat if you know what I'm talking about. Absolutely. It's a foundational core that every OT practitioner who graduated in the United States learns how to do passive range of motion for various large joints. So you have a foundation there. Let's think about another thing that I know that you know how to do. You're working in peds already, right? How many of you could put your hands on a muscle and think, oh my goodness, I'm looking at my fine motor evaluation and this child's hands are puffy. These muscles are weak and thin. Their joints are hyperextended. Who would be able to notice that in your evaluation or your intervention treating a pediatric client? When you're looking at fine motor skills, would you notice that the muscle tone felt small? Just like you would notice it if you had a stroke patient and they had high tone in their arm and you went to touch that and feel that. Would you be able to feel what high tone feels like? So you know how to do passive intervention. The thing is, you just haven't applied it to a face and a mouth yet. So that's cool. Let's do that part. We're going to take through 3 different specific examples, and I'll walk you through the pediatric feeding framework with each of these examples to remind you and help you think, how do I take what I do know and apply it to feeding? Okay? If a child has a tight upper lip, how would we be able to recognize that? Well, during the passive phase of intervention, I want you to give yourself a finger up. Everybody got a finger? Give yourself a mustache And then slide your lip right, left, right, left, right, left. Go to the bottom lip, right, left, right, left, right, left. Give me a 1 in the chat if you followed along at home and you just did passive range of motion for your upper and lower lip. Congratulations. Now, the next thing I want to know, thinking about this child with a tight upper lip, if you had done passive range of motion for upper and lower lip, and the upper lip did not slide as far, felt thicker, felt denser, felt tighter, would you be able to recognize that that child had a tight upper lip? 1 for yes, 2 for no. Of course you could, because you know what muscle tone feels like and you know how to do passive range of motion. Let's keep going. What about thin cheeks? So thinking about what a thin muscle means, well, a thin muscle is a weak muscle, right? Everyone at home, I want you to take 2 fingers, your thumb and your index finger. One goes inside your mouth, one goes outside, and squeeze and stretch. Okay? While you squeeze and stretch, I want you to be thinking, do I feel a thick muscle body there between my fingers? I'm thinking that you probably all will, because most of us as average adults have nice muscles in our cheeks, right? But now knowing what an appropriate muscle feels like, give me a 1 in the chat if you would be able to palpate and do range of motion on a cheek muscle and notice, oh my goodness, that child's muscle is really thin in their cheek. Wow, it stretched so far and it was so thin, right? Just like the fingers that look puffy and low tone and have hyperextension, you would be able to do that. So let's go for a trickier example. Who thinks a tongue tie is more complex than a tight lip or a weak cheek? Give me a 1 if yes and a 2 if no. Because what I want to prove to you is, even with more complex conditions, the pediatric feeding framework will serve you and help point you the right direction. Okay? So we're getting some 1s. Yeah, I would agree too. A kid with a tongue tie has got a more complex or severe or significant condition than a child who just has some tightness in one place of their face and mouth. So let's practice doing a tongue tie. Everyone, again, give me your finger, and I want you to take the finger pad, and you're going to go under your tongue and slide right, left, intraorally under your tongue. While you're sliding, what I want you to notice is, do I feel the tissue underneath my tongue? And what does it feel like? Ready? Finger pad underneath. All right. Right. Now tell me, did anyone feel tissue underneath their tongue? 1 for yes, 2 for no. Betsy did. Sarah did. Pollyanna did. Great job, guys. Now, if you put your fingers in a child's mouth and when you went to palpate that tissue underneath their tongue, what you encountered was tight tissue that feels like a string. Do you think you would be able to feel that and recognize that that feels different than the tissue underneath your tongue? Like, whoa, that's like a really tight string. It feels exactly like a string, a tongue tie. 1 for yes and 2 for no. Of course you could, because now you kind of have a starting base of like, okay, I know what the inside of underneath of a tongue feels like. So you'll be able to apply that to it. So let's go on to the next step, active intervention and active assessment. So if you have your little triangle at home, I want you to write a few things. I'm going to tell you what to write. Under passive, I want you to add PROM to remind you that I know how to do passive range of motion. I also want you to add words like massage or stretch, because you also know how to do those things. Just like if a person had a tight upper arm, if they had CP or stroke, you would work to stretch out that tight muscle before you ask them to reach for something. You're going to work to stretch the tight lip or the tight tongue before you ask them to move their oral structures. Okay, so in the tippiest bit of the triangle, you should now have the word passive, PROM for passive range of motion, massage, and stretch. Give me a 1 if you're with me and a 2 if you're not. And Rachel's saying, it's more complicated than that. Of course it is, Rachel. You are not wrong. There are tongue ties you could miss. Okay, we're all together. Now I want you to go to the second section of your triangle, and I want you to add the word active. What do I mean by active? You might be thinking, Deb, I'm not with you. I don't know what active means. So let me remind you. Active is all the things that we do to assess or facilitate. Remember, passive was us doing hands-on to the child, but active is we're facilitating how the child is moving their structures. So how are they moving their lips, their cheeks, their tongues? Again, think through with me. We talked about doing passive range of motion in school on a shoulder. Who's ever asked a child when doing a fine or gross motor assessment, okay, Billy, reach overhead, reach really high, reach high to this guy. Give me a 1 in the chat if you know how to ask a child to move their arms through shoulder flexion to assess how far they can reach. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. Whoever had to do something called a home exercise program, either currently at your job or as a student in school? That's what we're talking about here. Whoever had to do a class called, I don't know, activity analysis? Does that ring any bells for you? Where you had to practice breaking down what the functional and physical, sensory, etc. Like what were all the performance skills that made up an activity? Then you had to decide for a client, where were their performance strengths and where were their performance deficits, right? All of that means that you know how to do active assessment and active intervention. So we're working in this active phase. We're not just looking at how far the tissue can move, right? But we're looking at how it moves. Why does it move that far? You're looking at with what strength? Who had to do something called manual muscle testing, right? Don't let me push you down. Don't let me push you down. Nobody did manual muscle testing? Come on, I'm sure I have some. Yeah, of course you did. So active includes range of motion, strength, endurance, symmetry, coordination. And I would bet that you're very well familiar with including range of motion, strength, endurance, symmetry, and coordination in your fine motor and gross motor assessments currently, or your interventions. Give me a 1 if this list of words is familiar to you when thinking about what you already do for fine and most gross motor. Of course it is. So now again, let's take it back to the mouth. For that tight upper lip, this is just an easy, simple, like really silly game, but kids love it. Do you want to be a cow or do you want to be an owl? Let me know. What are you going to be? And I'll be the other animal. Oh, you're going to be a cow. Okay. Well, on 3, you're going to make your animal noise. 1, 2, hoo, hoo. What are my lips doing? Hoo, hoo. My lips are in a round position. They're protruded forward. And they look pretty symmetrical from left to right and top to bottom, right? Hoo, hoo. You're going to ask the child to move their lips. And then you're going to look at the shape of their lips. If their top lip was tight, do you think that you would see the nice round shape? Or would you perhaps see a flat shape on the top and a rounder shape on the bottom? So you would see a difference in symmetry and active range of motion. Give me a 1 if you're following along. Give me a 2 if we need to go deeper on that. Of course, you would notice this difference. What about thin cheek muscles? Okay. When we chew, when we bite, notice what happens here. Can everyone see the compression of this muscle? We've got our masseter working to open and close our mouth. And when we swallow, look what muscle turns on. We get that squeeze compression. That's our buccinator. Could we ask a child to smile? Oh my goodness, big smile, ready? Wow, we can assess cheek symmetry and retraction, right? What about for a tongue tie? Everybody follow along with me. Okay, stick your tongue out as far as you go. Tongue protrusion. Tongue elevation. Bring your tongue up, up, up. Tongue lateralization. Tick, tock, tongue. Here we go. Tongue depression. Ah. If you were working with a child that you suspected a tongue tie in your assessment and intervention, do you think that you would include exercises to have them actively move their tongue and see how far they can move their tongue in each direction of expected movement. Give me a 1 if yes and a 2 if no. Of course you would. So now let's look at the last part of the triangle, the functional assessment intervention. In your following along at home, I want you to add under active words like AROM. I want you to add manual muscle testing. I want you to add home exercise program. I want you to add exercises, strength, endurance, coordination. Okay? Once you've done that, for the third slice of your triangle, you're going to write functional over there on the side. And so what does functional mean? Functional means all the things that we do by either observing, that would be our evaluation or assessment, or modifying, that would be our intervention, the way that a child is eating, drinking, blowing, sucking, chewing, swallowing, spitting, etc. Okay? So let's go back to our functional examples. Okay? The child with a tight upper lip, if they were going to take, let's say, a drink of something, and you're already sort of suspicious, you're like, okay, I felt some tightness there. I watched how they move their lips in the passive and active phase, and I really feel like that tight upper lip might be part of what's impacting them. Let me watch how they drink. Who would expect to see that that child with a tight upper lip might have difficulty sealing their lips on the edge of a cup or straw or bottle? Give me a 1 if yes and a 2 if no. And then if you saw that they had difficulty with lip seal, who would then work with that family to teach the family techniques such as, here, touch the cheek corners to help that child bring the lips forward. Or you might modify what shape and size of cup they're working with so that they're able to get lip closure to swallow. For the child who has thin or weak muscles, do you feel like the child with weak muscles might be a picky eater who avoids more resistive things? Give me a 1 if you think that that is likely. Or they're not safe with more crunchy or resistive things. If so, would part of your intervention be assessing not just what they eat, but how do they engage their cheeks? Do they get tired? Does one cheek have more endurance than the other? Do they chew their food thoroughly before they're swallowing? What's the maturity of their chewing coordination? And then that child with a tongue tie, well, do a dry swallow with me. Just close your mouth and swallow the saliva that's in your mouth. Did you notice that you have to bring your tongue up and roll it back to do even a dry swallow? So we might notice some swallowing differences for that child and have to work with what type of cup they're using, how do they need to modify. Maybe this child with the tongue tie is using their fingers to put in their mouth to place and hold their foods while they're chewing. Put a 1 in the chat if you've got any finger feeders on your caseload or that you sometimes have evaluated. A child, the parent says, they always want to eat with fingers and I don't know why they can use the spoon. Well, maybe they're not coordinating their tongue so hot, because if the tongue can't do its job, a great compensation would be using those fingers. And that would be part of your intervention to educate the family of, hey, we can't really ask them to do that different until we get their tongue moving differently, right? So they have the ability, because the ability will drive the behavioral change. So now let's put it all together. For the child who had the tongue tie, we would use passive interventions of manually releasing, stretching to improve that range of motion, that tight upper lip. We would actively work on their coordination and improving and extending their active range of their upper lip. And then functionally, we would be working on their lip placement when drinking or maybe closed mouth chewing. For the child who has thin cheek muscles, actively, we might be doing passive input, but it might look a little different than stretch. Remember that muscle is probably really stretchy already, but would we do like tappy, alerty input, like boop, 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 let's get those muscles firing. Actively, we would be working on straightforward strengthening endurance, like, okay, we're going to chew gum now. We're going to chew beef jerky. We're going to chew dried craisins. And then functionally, we'll be teaching that family not only how to modify foods, but how to increase the depth of cheek engagement when they're chewing and to modify and adapt things as they get tired. The child with a tongue tie, we're going to include manual release and stretching of the tight tissue as part of our intervention. We're also going to actively engage them in moving their tongue all the different directions it needs to move to extend and improve the range. And then functionally, we're going to be noticing the tongue position and coordination when they're chewing, drinking, and swallowing. Whew, I did not meet my time, guys. Not at all. I went way over. Does anyone have a guess as to how much time I spent going through the pediatric feeding framework? Because I promised you I was going to try to do it in 24 minutes. I already told you. Whoop, that was a lie. Didn't happen. 28, 29, 29. Yeah, I was really right there at 28, 29 minutes. You guys were following along just as good. The point is, did what you learned by thinking through the pediatric feeding framework benefit the way you're thinking about feeding therapy? Give me a 1 if yes and a 2 if no. And like I said, I love 2s because they help me broaden the way that I'm thinking and just make sure I don't have gaps in how I can support therapists. But it looks like there's a lot of 1s in the room. Everybody's like, oh yeah. So, okay, we didn't do it in 24 minutes, but in 28, 29 minutes, I hope that you feel that you have something that you can take and apply to your kids tomorrow in your practice. Okay. The cool thing about the pediatric feeding framework is it helps you break down all of this like super overwhelming, complex, oh my goodness, feeding is terrifying to, I know how to do this. Actually, let me just focus on one brick at a time and remind myself that I can actually be a feeding therapist and I can do this too. It helps you understand, where do I start with my interventions? How do I start to build a clinical reasoning process? How do I structure my interventions to know that I'm headed the right direction? And then it gives you the basis not only to feel more confident yourself, but using the pediatric feeding framework with the examples we did tonight. Give me a 1 in the chat if you feel like that would make you feel more confident in being able to answer a parent question, or write a SOAP note explaining what did you do in your session, why did you do it, and measure really, is this child making progress or not, right? So the pediatric feeding framework, the cool thing about it, the reason that I kind of pulled it up as, wow, even if you just take this one little tiny piece and you don't enroll my courses at this time, whatever, if you take this one piece, the cool thing about the framework and all of my courses is they will apply to all the feeding kids on your caseload, because we're going to be looking at not here, learn the DEB protocol, but here, learn how to think like a feeding therapist. Learn how to take your beautiful and gorgeous clinical reasoning skills that you have cultivated and built over the years that you were in school and the years that you've been in practice. You've got a lot to offer peds feeding. We just need to turn it on and tweak it and give you some support so that you know how to apply it there. So what did you learn from this training? If you had a specific outcome, I would love to hear what your experience was. And I just want to listen to that for a second. Like, did you, obviously everyone was like, yes, I learned something, but what was it that you took away from this training? Oh my goodness, don't be shy now. There we go. Heidi said, I love that it was a simple, organized approach of where to start. The best tools, Heidi, in my mind, are simple tools, because simple tools are going to help you feel, oh no, there we go. Simple tools are going to help you feel like you're able to focus on the child in front of you and give you the space to like adapt things to the child's specific needs. Taylor said, cow, owl, cow is so simple but so impactful. Yeah, like feeding therapy doesn't have to be complex. Like, I hope that over the years, your clinical reasoning is going to get more and more gorgeously complex, but you can start at a fairly simple place and still have a huge impact on your clients. Rachel said, I learned that I would like to learn more. Give me a 1 in the chat if you liked what you learned and you don't want this to be the end of your journey with the PEDS feeding framework or with my trainings. Because I have a lot more that I could give you, and even tonight, more things to give you. Betsy said it was simple, easy assessment strategies. Pollyanna said a more systematic way of looking at feeding. Who feels like the pediatric feeding framework has better alignment with who we are as OT practitioners, right? Like, we're using the way that we think. And the hands-on examples were great. Thank you so much, Courtney. I appreciate that feedback. Every time someone gives me feedback, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just like jotting these notes down because it helps me learn and grow. And I always take all of those thoughts, take all of those ideas, and continue to put them into like what I'm building, how I'm improving things, what my programs look like, so that over time, not only am I getting better, but over time, if you're working with me, you're getting access to more and more things that serve you and serve the kids on your caseload as well. Jaquai, that feeding needs OT as well, not just speech. I personally, like, I'm always going to say that, though. To be clear, there are a lot of phenomenal speech therapists in the world that work on PACE feeding as well. So I definitely don't want anyone to feel like, oh, like we're gonna put down speech therapists tonight. We absolutely love our speech therapy colleagues, and actually, lots of speech therapists also take the 24-hour feeding tour. I can't speak. 24-hour feeding therapist course. Some of the resources that I offer are OT only, but this course in itself is open to OT at speechies. Anna said this is a great addition to our clinical feeding protocol. Awesome. I assume that you're already working in PEDS feeding, Anna. Is that right? You have an awesome last name, by the way, in the OT world. If anyone knows like DIR floor time method, which I'm a huge fan of, the person who invented that was Stanley Greenspan. So Anna Greenspan here. Okay. And Jaquai also said like this would be helpful to parents. And that's the whole point, right? Because you and I both know that if you aren't supporting the parent and helping like them understand the homework, them be engaged in home carryover, and them really buy into the therapy process, then we're really not going to have as big of an impact as we could have. I do want to take a few minutes and think about like the next step of your journey. We have a bunch of more things to give tonight, but I hope that you kind of have your wheels spinning of like, okay, like if I could get this in 28 minutes, 29 minutes, what might I want to do next? This is an awesome first step. And like I said, I genuinely believe that the 24-hour feeding therapist is the best starting place or continuing place for pediatric feeding therapists, particularly those working in the OT professional. Some of you might be thinking like, oh, okay, you can do it. Your team can do it. You've been doing it forever. I'm hoping that this training on PEDS feeding framework kind of helped you feel like I can do it too. Give me a 1 in the chat if you have that sense of growing confidence just in this very moment, because I want to capture that of like, do you feel like you could do PEDS feeding too? And you could do an excellent job at PEDS feeding. I believe that about you as well. Again, going back to experiences of people who are taking my trainings and working in my programs, Savannah was a new graduate and she felt like she's going to use this knowledge throughout her career and apply it right away. Melissa felt like she was going to use the oral motor techniques to promote different oral motor skills and relate them directly to the kids on her caseload. Brandon felt like this was a huge confidence booster for him. I personally feel like confidence is half the game because we get in that headspace of like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm nervous. Like, we just kind of derail. But walking through the practical interventions was what was really helpful for him. So who is this course for? Maybe you're ready to take the next step on your feeding journey. Maybe you're working in pediatrics. Maybe you're wanting to work in pediatrics. Maybe you're new, maybe you're not. This course is pretty much for if this way of thinking that we went through connects with you, resonates with you, and you feel energized and excited about it, then this course is for you. Because I want you to have all the tools you need so that those 92% of kids on your caseload can get the feeding help that they need. That being said, I always tell people, take the path that's best for you. If you hated what you learned tonight, it didn't click with you, it didn't inspire you, it didn't help you, you do not feel like I did you the service of making the time that we spent together valuable, then I would not want you to take my course. And I hope you genuinely know that from all my heart. Like, don't stop talking to me, but go take a course that does motivate you and encourage you and connects with how you feel. Now, some people also might be wondering, can you really get it all done in 24 hours? How long it will really take? I'm busy. Give me a 1 in the chat if you feel like you are a busy bee in your life. I know I own a private practice. I have 6 kids. I'm pregnant with number 7. Like, our life is crazy bazonkers busy. So no shame in saying you're super busy. People approach doing this course lots of different ways. Some people approach this course like a podcast. So they listen to it on their car on the way to and from work, and then review the handouts just in the few minutes that they have to actually set aside and focus. Give me a 1 in the chat if you're a car listener. When I had a longer commute, I definitely was a car listener because I drove every day 1 hour to work and 1 hour from work. And so I always tried to use that time for like, oh, what can I pick up from that time? Andrew is asking, I'm a behavioral analyst. I miss most of them, unfortunately. Will this course assist me? So if you didn't get to hear the whole Zoom, everybody who's in here tonight and everybody who's registered is going to get a copy of the replay sent to your inbox tomorrow morning. So don't worry about, oh my goodness, I missed a question or I want to watch this piece again. You will have access to that. What I will say, Andrea, is I'm sure that thinking through these foundations helps anyone who's working with kids. That being said, it is important that if you're talking about skilled therapeutic intervention, you have the licensure and scope of practice and stay within your scope of practice. So for the most part, people who take my trainings in terms of I'm going to use this for my clinical practice is really appropriate just for speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, and occupational therapy assistants, to my knowledge. Behavioral analysts do not have a scope of practice directly in the oral motor aspects of feeding that we cover in my courses. So I don't think it's bad for you to listen to. Of course, it's going to help you think broader, but I don't know that it will align with your scope of practice to be safe and practical to actually do in a hands-on way for clients on your caseload. And definitely let me know if I didn't answer that question correctly or need to go more into it. So we were talking about like, how do you do it? Other people are like, I just want to focus and get it done with. That's how most people I feel like have done the course. They just blocked out. It takes about 3 full days if you're going to just block it out. So give me a 1 in the chat if you've ever done a Friday, Saturday, Sunday course or ever been to an AOTA conference, right? Or ever been to your state association conference. I know in North Carolina, we have an amazing fall conference where we do like Friday, Saturday, Sunday courses, and it's amazing. So I think there's just different ways to do it, whether you take like one weekend or one day at a time, or pop it into your life where you can. Melissa said she was able to apply concepts immediately. That is my goal for you just in this training, let alone the course. And then why I built it, I already sort of told you that I was teaching it in person for people in North Carolina. And I built it in an online format because there are therapists across the United States who aren't feeling confident, prepared, safe, effective to help the kids that need them the most with feeding. Rachel asked, does this course address behavioral feeding concerns as well, such as ARFID? So we're going to go over in a little bit what are some of the basic modules that are in the course. But within the 24 modules, there's several modules that just address conditions that we see in occupational therapy. I actually don't have a module specifically on ARFID, but we talk extensively within the course about how to apply concepts within the context of supporting kids who have high anxiety, food avoidance, picky eaters, sensory processing needs, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have like an ARFID specific module, just to be transparent with you, but I feel like there's a lot presented in a way that you would be able to apply it to them. Hopefully that answers your question, Rachel, but if you have more as we keep going, like definitely let me know. Melissa felt like she was able to feel more confident as well. So if you're ready to start, I've got a free place for you to start at while you think about whether or not the 24-hour feeding therapist is for you. Give me a 1 in the chat if you're already following me on social media, and give me a 2 if not. Okay, so we've got a few 1s and a heck of a lot of 2s. All right, so let me give you some free hookups within the social media world, because I think even if you decide not to move forward in my course, what I hope you'll do is you'll stay connected to our Peds Feeding community while you think about this course and continue to grow and learn and like have some tools to do that with. So if you're not following me on social media, there's going to be a couple places that I share tonight. On Facebook, my Facebook account is Deb Dorsett, DEBB DORSETT. And if you follow me there, I have daily feeding tip videos. So it's like 60 to 90-second clips that I post pretty much Monday through Friday of just like pediatric feeding questions. And John is like dropping the link to my Facebook there. So that would be just a free resource. And then if you ever want me to like highlight or feature your question, you can shoot me a Facebook message and be like, oh my goodness, Deb, here's this case that I'm working on, or here's this thing that I'm stuck trying to figure out. Like, can you do a daily feeding tip for me? And I love doing custom daily feeding tips. They're my favorite. Okay. The other cool place that you can hook up online and just get tons of free resources is the Peds Feeding Tribe community. I'm assuming if you're not following me on Facebook, you're probably not in my tribe yet. But if you go to Facebook, you'll have to request to join the tribe because it is a closed group. So I have to tell you that because if you don't answer the mentorship questions, I'm going to love that you sent me a request, but I'm going to say, oh my goodness, please answer the questions so I know if you're an appropriate fit for this group. The reason is when I did a survey of social media groups, because I really felt like community was the thing that was lacking within Peds Feeding. What I found is we have gorgeous, amazing, vibrant, like womb communities for pediatrics in OT, right? Give me a one if you know what I'm talking about. Like you're a member of Pediatric Occupational Therapists or those other giant 40, 50,000 member groups. We also have some really cool feeding groups. So give me a one if you're a member of something like there's one called Pediatric Feeding Professionals. And I think there's like 10 or 20,000 people in there. It's a pretty cool group. The thing with those two groups, while amazing, is they don't really like focus down in our niche, right? And so the Peds Feeding Tribe is an occupational therapy exclusive community to talk all things pediatric and feeding for OTs and OTAs. We will also admit people who are OT practice owners or OT managers. Not to say that like speech therapists can't follow me and be connected in other ways, but I just really felt drawn to we need our own occupational therapy Peds Feeding community. So if that sounds like yes, I would like to have a space to ask my feeding questions. I want to see all the handouts and the blog posts that Deb's drops in Peds Feeding Tribe. Then go ahead and sign up.